back in New Mexico after running back to Wisconsin for my son-in-law's father's memorial. Dave Quanbeck, great guy, so I'm really glad we made it back. But we're back in New Mexico, and on our way back, a couple of things struck me about sort of, I don't know, things I find interesting that are odd, I guess, in a way, but it has to do with the unexpected nature of things. So we're coming back, and we're driving in a part of New Mexico, eastern New Mexico, that's just wide open. You can literally go 20 or 30 miles without seeing a building. And we pull over to have lunch on a little rest area, wide spot in the road. It's a divided highway, US 285. And here are two giant cowboy structures, I don't know, cutouts, I guess you might call them. They're kind of silhouettes, except they're painted where you can actually see the cowboys. And they appear to be arguing across from one another across the highway. And it turns out it was an artist did this, and he had done another one, I guess, that we haven't seen, which was some aliens looking to get their spacecraft jump-started near Roswell. But the thing is that this is out in the middle of nowhere, and just suddenly there, and just a little whimsy, but it's fun. Anyway, thinking about that, I ran across a railroad bridge in Kansas. This thing's huge, out in the middle of nowhere, and I just had to go investigate it. And the thing was built, I forget when, back in the early part of the 1900s, but it's got Art Deco cement for some of the pillars, and it's a quarter of a mile long. And Kansas, as you can picture, is incredibly flat, and so to have this huge structure, and again, it's just out in the middle of nowhere, there's something about that whole thing that just attracts me to those things. It makes me wonder if, how long would these things last if our civilization ceased tomorrow, and then what would alien visitors think of these massive structures that suddenly appear out in the middle of nowhere? Anyway, it brings me to where we are tonight. We're at Brantley Lake State Park, and this is between Roswell, New Mexico, and Carlsbad, New Mexico. Or pardon me, it's actually between Artesia and Carlsbad. And Terry and I lived in Artesia back in the 80s, and I designed and sold frac jobs, among other things that I did in the oil patch here. It's still a huge business here, and you can smell the hydrogen sulfide in the air, which when you work in the oil patch, you sort of get used to and appreciate in a strange way, even though it's deadly in higher concentrations. But it's nice to see that people are still making a living here, even though I want us to get away from using hydrocarbons for fuel, or at least for our primary fuel. But the thing is, this lake didn't exist when we lived here, and we left in, I think, 1984 or 85. Didn't exist. As far as I know, there weren't even any plans for it, but I probably didn't pay attention to that kind of thing. Anyway, they built a massive dam on the Pecos River and created a reservoir in the middle of what was just absolute, to me, desert. So here it is, this great big huge dam suddenly in the middle of nowhere, another one of these objects. The campground's nice, and it's great. I'm glad we're able to stay here. But these things don't always work out in the West the way you would picture elsewhere in the country, maybe. As an example, there's a sign that tells you that you have to catch and release any fish here. not because they don't want undue fishing pressure. It's because there's so much DDT that leaches into the water here, it makes eating the fish unsafe. And the DDT probably comes from years ago when ranchers used it for a variety of things. But what happens in the Southwest is because it's so dry here, water flows into these reservoirs and a lot of it evaporates. So any kind of pollutants in the water tend to be more concentrated here, and especially with the drought going on. This dam is huge, but the lake behind it right now isn't. And this is the second lake we've seen in New Mexico this way, where it's probably less than a fourth of the aerial coverage, and probably much less than that in terms of volume of what it should be, just because of the drought. But anyway, one thing that's for sure, the jackrabbits here seem to be doing quite well. I think the one I got a picture of was bigger than Gizzy. So at least the wildlife, the DDT hasn't seemed to have impacted it significantly. And hopefully that will continue to be the case.